strikingly beautiful and captivating. Maria Fitzherbert caused Prince George to risk his place in the line of succession and to marry her in secret. When she's mentioned in histories of George IV, it's usually as a footnote and rarely even by name. She's the divorced Catholic whom the rebellious prince legally married before his real marriage to Caroline of Brunswick. There's just one problem. George didn't divorce her before he married Caroline. Our story begins with the 18-year-old Prince George seeing a woman from afar and deciding immediately that it was love at first sight. The woman in question was 6 years older and already married. This didn't prevent him from running into the street to chase after her carriage that day. He did not win the race and faded into the distance, but he continued to look right at her. The woman's name was Maria Fitzherbert. Maria was a commoner who'd already been married twice, though not for love. This was still the time where marrying for love was practically unheard of, especially when your first husband dies suddenly in an accident not long after the marriage ceremony without having changed his will. As a result, Maria didn't inherit anything from him, and with very few options, she quickly married again, to a Thomas Fitzherbert. Unfortunately for her, he proved to be of ill health, heaving over in coughing fits that put him in the grave after only a year of marriage. Now at 24 years old, Maria was a widow twice, and it was then that she met Prince George for the first time. She had been persuaded to abandon mourning in favor of attending the opera in London for one night. As luck would have it, her seat was directly across the room from the young prince. Recognizing her and impatient, George turned to his companion in the middle of the opera and demanded an introduction to her. From that meeting on, with each curtsy and kiss of the hand, George was a man completely obsessed. He wrote letters to her every day, with each missive delivered by courier to her apartment. He invited her to dinners and parties. She graciously declined and held him at bay. While George was already a known womanizer, his love of women wasn't a problem. He'd already fallen in love with Maria. The true problem was the law preventing a prince from marrying a commoner. This particular prince found that unacceptable, so he took one of his own daggers and stabbed it into his side. The reason? Well, he told the surgeon to tell Maria Fitzherbert that he had stabbed himself and to say that if she doesn't come to his side, that he will pull off his bandages and bleed to death. She arrived, and George survived. He then proposed by saying, "Say you'll marry me or I'll rip off my bandages and bleed to death." When she didn't immediately respond, he began to pull the dressings out of the wound. Maria then agreed to marry him. However, as her acceptance was under the threat of his own suicide, Maria came to the conclusion that such an engagement was not binding. While the prince believed he could toss laws aside, she did not. She could not marry him, and so, in secret, she fled the country. It turns out that Maria living over in France was not enough to dissuade George IV. While she had left no forwarding address or information of any kind as to where she was now living, he found her through envoys. In fact, he sent so many messengers that the French government became suspicious. 3 times his messengers were arrested and imprisoned on charges of espionage, but really they carried love letters and trinkets. He promised her his hand in marriage despite the laws against a royal marrying a commoner and a Catholic. To him, all that mattered was being with the woman he loved. By now, a year has passed since Maria fled England. The isolation and moving had taken its toll. She was lonely, without friends, and hounded by a French marquis who also wanted to marry her. After 12 months of letters from George baring his soul and swearing he'd refuse any marriage suggested by his father, she agreed to marry him in secret. They married in a small ceremony at Maria's London home with her brother and uncle as witnesses. The priest was broken out of jail for the ceremony, as no law-abiding priest would marry the prince to a divorced Catholic commoner against King George III's wishes. Afterwards, the two settled down and hosted parties for high society, with the most selective guest list. Things were surprisingly easy for them. George III did nothing against them. However, George IV lived to excess. Soon he had to turn to his father to pay off his debts. He owed over £6,000, what would be well over 10 million today. His father agreed on one condition. George needed to properly marry a noble or royal Protestant and beget an heir. Parliament agreed, and Caroline of Brunswick was presented as his future bride. Exactly 10 years after marrying Maria Fitzherbert, his marriage was over. The relationship was disavowed as a scandalous lie, and Maria was once again abandoned by the man she'd married. As for George IV, he met Caroline on their wedding day and was not impressed. He thought her ugly and then spent the entire ceremony blackout drunk. After the birth of their daughter 9 months later, he bribed her to go travel the continent. But he also hadn't forgotten Maria. His new will left everything to her. As many have probably noticed by now in the story, George was technically married to 2 women. Maria noticed this as well, so she wasn't convinced by this new will. Add to this the fact that he had a number of mistresses. She turned to the Pope for advice on the situation, and he encouraged her to reconcile with her husband, as the marriage was legitimate in the eyes of the Catholic Church. On this advice, she reconciled with George. However, all was not well. King George III, her husband's father, and the man who lost those 13 American colonies, was ailing. He was blind, deaf, and spouting nonsense. As his heir, her George became the official regent for his father. He threw a party for this, but Maria was not allowed at the dining room that evening. Facing pressure, George called her Mrs. Fitzherbert and declared she must sit according to her rank. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. Maria had tolerated his affairs and drinking, but she refused to deal with any more humiliation. She left and never returned to him. By the time George IV became king, he spoke of his first wife with malice, repeating the claims that the marriage was only a scandalous rumor. Of course, this didn't mean he suddenly liked Caroline. When she tried to be crowned queen alongside him, the church doors were slammed shut in her face. George IV lived alone with mistresses, binge-eating, gout, dropsy, and drugs. He was extremely obese at his death, but again he hadn't forgotten Maria. On his deathbed, he wrote, "Please come to me. Death is near." Maria did not come. She didn't believe he was really dying. After all, he'd written many letters claiming to be dying. While she wrote that she wished him to get well soon, she didn't know the lack of response was due to him dying with her letter clutched in hand under his pillow. She found out when the executor of his will arrived with George's last request, to be buried with her miniature portrait. She wept and was perhaps the only person to mourn a thoroughly unpopular king, despite everything he'd put her through. Thank you for watching. Leave a comment, a like, subscribe if you want, or check out the tip jar. There's always more history.